Welcome to Life Story 999. Today, we bring you a powerful story of justice, transformation, and redemption. This tale reveals what happens when those who misuse their power face the consequences of their actions. Imagine this. An elderly woman is wrongfully targeted by a cop who believes his authority makes him untouchable. Little does he know, this encounter will completely change his life and the community forever. Before we dive in, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced an unjust situation or witnessed someone standing up for what's right? Share your experiences in the comments or email us. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire change. Now, let's begin this journey of courage and accountability. What would you do if you found yourself in this situation? Officer James Bradley was well known in his precinct, not for his compassion, but for his tough, no-nonsense demeanor. For years, James had worked the night shift in a struggling neighborhood. To him, the people living there were just trouble waiting to happen. One chilly evening, James spotted an elderly woman standing outside a small grocery store. She wore a long coat and held a cane in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. Her name was Evelyn Carter, a retired schoolteacher who had spent decades educating the very children in this neighborhood. To James, however, she looked suspicious. Convinced she didn't belong, James approached Evelyn with a sharp demand for her ID. Evelyn, calm and composed, explained she had just bought groceries and was waiting for her ride. But her serenity only irritated James, who felt his authority was being undermined. "I need to see some identification," James barked, stepping closer to her. Evelyn remained unshaken, her eyes meeting his without fear. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong. I'm just waiting here for my grandson to pick me up," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. James wasn't used to people like Evelyn, people who remained calm in the face of his aggression. He thrived on intimidation, on watching others squirm under his authority. But Evelyn's refusal to cower only made him angrier. "Empty your bag," he demanded, pointing at the grocery bag she held. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "Officer, these are just my groceries." "There's no need for this," she said, her voice still steady. The refusal struck a nerve. James felt his blood boil. He could feel the eyes of onlookers from across the street, and the last thing he wanted was to look weak in front of them. He stepped forward, grabbing Evelyn's arm roughly. Her cane clattered to the ground as she struggled to keep her balance. "You don't get to decide what happens here," James spat, his face inches from hers. Evelyn winced, the pain in her arm clear, but she still did not cry out. Her silence only fueled his frustration. Without thinking, he raised his hand and struck her, the force of the blow sending her stumbling backward. Evelyn fell to the ground, her groceries spilling out of the bag. A loaf of bread rolled across the sidewalk, and a can of soup clattered against the curb. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the street silent except for the sound of Evelyn's cane, still rolling away. James stood there, his chest heaving, his face flushed with anger. He expected Evelyn to cry, to beg, to show fear. But instead, she slowly pushed herself up, her eyes locking onto his with a look that was not of fear, but of quiet strength. You have no idea what you've just done," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a weight that seemed to cut through the cold night air. James frowned, his anger momentarily giving way to confusion. Who was this woman? She wasn't reacting the way people usually did when faced with his authority. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite place. Before he could say anything, a car pulled up to the curb. A young man jumped out, rushing over to Evelyn. "Grandma, are you okay?" he called, his eyes wide with concern. He helped Evelyn to her feet, his gaze shifting to James, filled with a mixture of confusion and anger. "I'm fine, Marcus," Evelyn said softly, patting her grandson's arm. She turned her eyes back to James, her expression calm once more. "But this isn't over, officer. Not by a long shot." James watched as Marcus helped Evelyn into the car, his mind racing. Something about the way she spoke sent a chill down his spine. Little did he know, Evelyn wasn't just an ordinary woman. The incident didn't go unnoticed. Unbeknownst to James, a bystander had recorded the confrontation on their phone. Evelyn, though shaken, rose to her feet with dignity. From her coat pocket, she revealed an ID badge that caught James completely off guard. Evelyn Carter wasn't just a retired teacher. She was also a volunteer federal advocate for elder abuse and community policing reform. Her connections ran deep within the justice system. "Officer Bradley," she said firmly, "you just made a grave mistake." James felt his stomach drop. He glanced at the badge, the words blurring as fear began to take root. This wasn't the outcome he had expected. He had always assumed he could intimidate his way through situations like this. But Evelyn's calm confidence unsettled him. Within hours, Evelyn's video and statement were submitted to the FBI. The footage went viral, sparking outrage and protests across the city. The community rallied around Evelyn, demanding justice, not just for her, but for all those who had been unfairly targeted by officers like James. The footage spread like wildfire on social media, showing an elderly woman being mistreated, and the outcry was swift and fierce. As the video gained traction, local news stations picked up the story. The footage showed James's aggression and Evelyn's quiet resilience. It was a stark contrast that resonated deeply with viewers. People were horrified that a respected elder of the community could be treated with such disregard. It wasn't long before the mayor and the police chief were called upon to make statements. They promised a thorough investigation and assured the public that such behavior would not be tolerated. Meanwhile, James felt his world beginning to unravel. His colleagues distanced themselves, avoiding eye contact in the hallways and refusing to sit with him during breaks. The camaraderie he had once felt at the precinct had vanished. No one wanted to be associated with the officer whose face was now plastered across every news outlet. His superiors initiated an internal investigation, and James found himself placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. At first, James was defiant. He told himself that he had done nothing wrong, that Evelyn had been resisting his authority, and that he was just doing his job. But the more he watched the footage, the more he began to see what everyone else saw: an officer who had overstepped his bounds, who had used unnecessary force against someone who posed no threat. As the days passed, the protests grew. People gathered outside the precinct, holding signs that read "Justice for Evelyn" and "End Police Brutality." The atmosphere was tense, and James could see the frustration and anger in the faces of the protesters as he drove past them. He felt a gnawing sense of guilt, a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Evelyn, meanwhile, was not content to simply wait for justice to be served. She took to the airwaves, appearing on local news programs to share her story. She spoke not just of her own experience, but of the broader issue of police misconduct, particularly towards vulnerable members of the community. Her calm, articulate demeanor won her the respect of viewers, and soon she became a symbol of the fight for justice and accountability. "This isn't just about me," Evelyn said during an interview. "This is about making sure that no one else has to go through what I went through. It's about holding those in power accountable for their actions, and it's about changing the culture that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked." The pressure continued to mount. James's superiors, feeling the heat from both the public and higher authorities, decided to make an example of him. They announced that James would face disciplinary action, including mandatory retraining and a possible demotion. But even that wasn't enough to quell the outrage. The community wanted real accountability. They wanted James to face legal consequences for his actions. One evening, as James sat alone in his apartment, he received a call from his union representative. The man's voice was somber as he explained the situation. "James, the department is throwing you to the wolves," he said. "They're not going to back you on this. You're looking at possible charges. You need to lawyer up." For the first time, the gravity of the situation truly hit James. He felt a wave of panic wash over him, his hands trembling as he hung up the phone. He had always thought that his badge would protect him, that the system would back him no matter what. But now, he was beginning to realize just how wrong he had been. Evelyn's determination and the community's unwavering support had turned the tide against him. James found himself isolated, his career in jeopardy, and his future uncertain. He had spent years believing that his authority made him untouchable, but now he was facing the consequences of his actions, and there was no escaping them. Little did James know, this was only the beginning. The ripple effect of his actions would soon reach far beyond his own life. shaking the entire community and forcing everyone, including James himself, to confront the harsh truths about power, accountability, and redemption. While James was placed on administrative leave, Evelyn took center stage in the fight for reform. She shared her story on local news, emphasizing the importance of holding people accountable, not to destroy their lives, but to create a better, safer community for everyone. "We need change," Evelyn said during a televised interview. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about making sure that people in positions of power understand the impact of their actions. We all deserve to feel safe, respected, and heard." Her words resonated with the community, and soon, she was invited to speak at city council meetings and community forums. Evelyn's story had become a catalyst for broader discussions about police accountability, and she used her newfound platform to push for meaningful changes. One of the key reforms she advocated for was the implementation of restorative justice programs. Evelyn believed in the power of transformation, that even those who had done wrong could learn, grow, and become better versions of themselves. It was this belief that led her to make a surprising request during the investigation into James's actions. Instead of demanding that James be punished to the fullest extent of the law, Evelyn asked that he participate in a restorative justice program. It was an unusual move, and many were shocked by her decision. But Evelyn knew that true change required more than punishment. It required understanding, empathy, and a willingness to confront one's own mistakes. James, meanwhile, was given the opportunity to defend himself during the investigation. He hired a lawyer and prepared for the worst, but he was surprised when he learned about Evelyn's request. The idea of attending a restorative justice program made him bristle. To him, it felt like an admission of guilt, a humiliation that he wasn't ready to endure. At first, James resisted. He saw the program as a waste of time, something that would only serve to make him look weak. He was used to being in control, to wielding authority without question. Sitting in a room and listening to people talk about their feelings was not something he thought he could handle. But as the pressure mounted and the investigation continued, James found himself with few options. His lawyer advised him that cooperating with Evelyn's request might be his best chance at salvaging what was left of his career. Reluctantly, James agreed to participate. The first session was uncomfortable. James sat in a circle with Evelyn and several other members of the community, each of whom had been affected by police misconduct in some way. He listened as they shared their stories of fear, of feeling powerless, of the lasting impact that encounters with the police had left on their lives. James wanted to argue, to defend himself, but something in the room held him back. The raw emotion, the pain in their voices, made it impossible for him to dismiss their experiences. When it was Evelyn's turn to speak, she looked directly at James. Her voice was calm, but her words carried a weight that struck him deeply. "Officer Bradley," she began, "you may think this is just about what happened between you and me, but it's bigger than that. It's about the way people in this community have been treated for years. It's about the fear that many of us feel when we see a police car drive by. You have a choice now, to continue down the path you've been on, or to make a change." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes dropping to the floor. He had never thought about his job in that way. To him, it had always been about maintaining order, about keeping the streets safe. He had never considered the fear that his presence might instill in others, especially those who had done nothing wrong. Over the next few weeks, James continued to attend the sessions. He listened as people spoke about their lives, about the challenges they faced, and about the impact that systemic bias and discrimination had on their community. He began to see the world through their eyes, a perspective he had never bothered to consider before. Evelyn didn't berate him during their sessions. Instead, she asked him one simple question: "What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?" It was a question that haunted James long after the sessions were over. He had spent his career believing that he was making a difference, that his tough approach was what the community needed. But now, he wasn't so sure. What if, instead of helping, he had been contributing to the very problems he claimed to be fighting against? Slowly, James began to open up. He spoke about his own experiences, about the pressures of the job, about the fear he often felt but never showed. He admitted that he had let his frustrations and biases cloud his judgment, that he had made mistakes. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when he wanted to walk away, to return to the safety of his old beliefs. But something kept him there. Perhaps it was Evelyn's unwavering patience, or the stories of those he had wronged. Perhaps it was the realization that, for the first time in his life, he was truly being held accountable. By the end of the program, James was a changed man. He wasn't perfect, and he knew he had a long way to go. But he had taken the first steps towards understanding and growth. He had begun to see the people in the community not as threats, but as individuals, each with their own stories, struggles, and hopes. He realized that his role as a police officer wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about serving the community, about protecting and respecting the people who live there. Evelyn, too, saw a change in James. She saw a man who was finally willing to confront his own shortcomings, who was ready to learn and to do better. It wasn't the outcome she had expected when she first stood up to him outside that grocery store, but it was the one she had hoped for. True justice, she knew, wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, about creating a community where everyone, even those who had made mistakes, could find a path to redemption. The story of Evelyn and James became a turning point for the entire city. The restorative justice program that Evelyn had championed was expanded, giving others the opportunity to confront their actions and seek forgiveness. The police department underwent significant reforms, focusing on community engagement and accountability. And James, once the symbol of everything that was wrong with the system, became a voice for change within the force. It wasn't easy, and there were still many challenges ahead. But for the first time, there was hope. Hope that things could be different, that the community and the police could work together to build a better, safer future for everyone. Months passed, and James emerged from the program a changed man. With Evelyn's encouragement, he publicly apologized, not just to her, but to the entire community. He admitted his faults and pledged to work toward rebuilding trust. James resigned from his position as a police officer but didn't leave public service. Inspired by Evelyn, he began working as a community liaison, helping to bridge the gap between law enforcement and neighborhoods like the one he had once patrolled with prejudice. He knew it wouldn't be easy to earn back the trust of the community, but he was determined to try. He spent his days organizing town halls, listening to residents' concerns, and working closely with community leaders to address the issues that had long gone unheeded. He spoke with young people, encouraging them to pursue careers in public service, and worked with other former officers to educate them on the importance of empathy and understanding in their interactions. It was a slow process, but little by little, James began to see the difference he was making. People who once looked at him with distrust now saw him as someone who was genuinely trying to help. Evelyn, for her part, continued her advocacy work, now alongside James. Their unlikely partnership became a symbol of hope and change for others. News outlets picked up their story, showing how accountability and forgiveness could lead to real transformation. The image of Evelyn and James standing side by side, working together to improve their community, resonated deeply with people across the city. One day, James and Evelyn were invited to speak at a local high school. They stood in front of a group of students, sharing their story, a story of mistakes, consequences, and the power of change. James spoke openly about his past, about the way his own biases had blinded him to the humanity of the people he was supposed to serve. He talked about the impact that Evelyn's courage had on him, how her willingness to confront him with both strength and compassion had set him on a new path. The students listened intently, some with tears in their eyes, others with a look of determination. "We all make mistakes," James said, his voice steady. "But it's what we do after those mistakes that defines who we are. I've learned that true strength comes from admitting when you're wrong and doing everything you can to make it right." Evelyn added, "Change isn't easy. It takes time, and it takes courage. But if we're willing to listen to each other, to learn from each other, we can create a community where everyone feels safe and valued." Their words left an impact, and in the weeks that followed, James and Evelyn received messages from students who had been inspired to get involved in community service, to stand up for what was right, and to work towards a better future. Their story had not only changed James's life, but had also inspired countless others to believe in the power of accountability and redemption. The precinct where James worked also underwent significant reforms. With Evelyn's involvement, officers received new training in de-escalation and community engagement, ensuring that no one else would face what she had endured. Officers were encouraged to build relationships with the people they served, to understand their stories and struggles, and to see themselves as partners in creating a safe community, rather than as enforcers of order. The changes weren't immediate, and there were still setbacks. Not everyone was open to the new approach, and there were times when James faced hostility from both former colleagues and community members who were unwilling to forgive. But he persevered, knowing that the work he was doing was making a difference, even if it wasn't always visible. Evelyn stood by him every step of the way, her belief in the power of change unwavering. 1 year after the incident that had brought them together, Evelyn and James organized a community event to celebrate the progress that had been made. It was held at the very park where James had once patrolled with suspicion, and now he stood there with a sense of purpose and hope. Families gathered, children played, and there was a feeling of unity that had once seemed impossible. Evelyn took the stage, her voice carrying across the crowd. Today, we're here to celebrate not just how far we've come, but the journey ahead of us. Change doesn't happen overnight, but when we come together, when we listen, learn, and grow, anything is possible. James followed, his voice filled with emotion. I want to thank this community for giving me a second chance. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm committed to doing everything I can to make things right. We're all in this together, and I'm proud to be part of this community. As the crowd cheered, James looked out and saw the faces of the people he had once seen as threats. Now, they were his neighbors, his friends, his partners in building a better future. And standing beside him was Evelyn, the woman whose courage had changed everything. Together, they had found a new path forward, one built on understanding, compassion, and the belief that even the hardest of hearts could change. As Evelyn and James spoke together at a city hall meeting months later, the audience gave them a standing ovation. Their story wasn't just about a single incident. It was about the power of accountability, humility, and the possibility of redemption. The transformation they embodied had become a beacon of hope for others, showing that even the most broken systems could be repaired if people were willing to put in the work. Evelyn began her speech by thanking the community for their unwavering support. She knew that her journey had not been a solitary one. The strength of her neighbors and friends had fueled her fight for justice. We're here today because we chose not to look away, she said, her voice steady and heartfelt. We chose to stand up, to demand change, and to believe that people can learn from their mistakes. James stood beside her, nodding as she spoke. He had come a long way from the man who had once viewed the community with suspicion and disdain. Now, he was part of it, striving to make it better. When it was his turn to speak, James took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the audience. Faces of people he once feared, people who had feared him, and now, people who had become his allies. I know that an apology alone can never undo the harm I caused, James said, his voice filled with emotion. But I want you to know that I am committed to being part of the solution. I've learned that real power doesn't come from authority or fear. It comes from connection, from understanding, and from working together to make things right. The audience was silent, captivated by the sincerity in his words. They could see the change in James, not just in his actions, but in his demeanor, in the way he spoke with humility rather than arrogance. He wasn't just talking about change, he was living it. Evelyn then shared a powerful message that resonated with everyone present. No one is beyond redemption if they're willing to change, she said, her eyes meeting James. But change begins with accountability. It begins with recognizing our mistakes and making a conscious effort to do better, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. She turned to James with a smile. Sometimes, the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful transformations, she added, her voice warm with encouragement. James smiled back, nodding in agreement. Their journey had been anything but easy. It had been filled with difficult moments, with tears, anger, and doubt. But it had also been filled with growth, understanding, and a shared desire to create a community that was safe and just for everyone. The audience rose to their feet, applauding not just for Evelyn and James, but for what their story represented. It was a story of second chances, of hope in the face of adversity, and of the belief that true justice is not about retribution, but about restoration. The standing ovation was not just for the two of them, but for the entire community that had come together to support the changes that were now taking root. After the meeting, many people approached Evelyn and James, thanking them for their courage and sharing their own stories of injustice and hope. A young woman, her eyes glistening with tears, told James that his transformation had inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement, not to wield power, but to protect and serve with compassion. An elderly man shook Evelyn's hand, expressing his gratitude for her strength and resilience, which had given him hope that change was possible, even after years of feeling powerless. As the room slowly emptied, James and Evelyn stood side by side, taking in the magnitude of what they had accomplished. It wasn't the end of their journey. There was still much work to be done, and they both knew that change was a continuous process. But they had taken the first steps, and they had done it together. Evelyn looked at James, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and determination. "We've come a long way," she said softly, "but this is just the beginning. There's still so much more we can do." James nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose he had never known before. "I'm ready," he replied. "Whatever it takes, I'm ready." Their story was a reminder that change starts with individuals willing to take responsibility, to face uncomfortable truths, and to work towards a better future. It was a testament to the fact that no matter how deep the divides, understanding and empathy could bridge the gap, one conversation, one act of accountability at a time. As they left the city hall that day, Evelyn and James knew that their work was far from over. But they also knew that they weren't alone. The community was with them, ready to take the next steps, to continue the fight for justice, and to build a future where everyone, regardless of who they were, was treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. Thank you for watching this story on Life Story 999. What would you have done in Evelyn's shoes? Have you ever seen someone misuse their authority or turn their life around? Share your thoughts in the comments or email us your own experiences. We'd love to hear from you. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, let's spread messages of justice, accountability, and hope. Remember, every act of kindness or fairness makes a difference. Until next time, stay inspired, and thank you for being part of our Life Story 999 family.